to let me know.
And with that little explosion out of the way, some exposition. I didn't care much for Far Cry 3 at all. It was a great blueprint for a game, but they gave you all of these toys and modes without thinking about how to design levels around them, and I was expecting as much for this game, which I pretty much lucked into. But I was actually really impressed by Far Cry 4. In fact, I would go so far as to call it one of the best games of last year. I liked Vars just fine, but Pagan blows him out of the water. Vars only faked being affable. Min is actually quite welcoming, while still coming off as an unnerving threat. You never feel like he's lying or playing to your emotions when he's talking about RJ's family ties, but the spread of his dictatorship can be felt everywhere you go. The rest of the rogues gallery is kind of underwhelming, but I really like the conflict between the two leaders of the Golden Path. You have to pick whose side you're on before several of the main missions, and you know, it was actually quite a difficult choice each time. Sabal wants to restore the old ways and always says, "It's what your war hero father would have wanted." Amateur would prefer to move on from tradition and turn Karat into a prosperous country, but she has to hang on to the criminal elements Min gladly harbours to do it. So who do you root for? The guy playing to your family ties, blind to the conservative elements of the old ways? Or the woman who doesn't flinch a little when told that using opium to fund war effort makes her no different than the bad guy? The final choice had me standing around thinking about it for 5 minutes. No calmer choice in games has ever done that. In terms of gameplay, it's a lot harder than its predecessor. Far Cry 3 pretty much gave you everything you needed at the start, and every addition to your arsenal was just an increment. In Far Cry 4, you start off throwing bait to use nature against the army, and you're stuck with a bow and arrow for a good while. Even when you manage to scrounge an assault rifle from an enemy, a head-on fight, while not impossible, is a demonstratively worse idea than stealth. RJ's damage threshold is actually quite low. You can certainly feel powerful in a straight firefight, but never unstoppable. Using stealth, on the other hand, feels empowering. First just with a bow, and then when you later get to use rifles. Enemies can notice you rather quickly, so you have to be perceptive enough to use cover well, but slowly picking off the army one by one as their buddies get nervous before nailing the final enemy and being told you took out an entire stronghold undetected makes you feel empowered in a way Jason Brody could have only dreamed of. The enemy force is neither overpowered nor unfair, well except for the helicopters, and that's what makes the game so fun in general. It's the combination of an open world that allows multiple approaches into an encampment, but also allows for lots of side activities with an atmosphere that reacts well enough to your presence to feel, well, not real, but organic enough. The collectibles, particularly the radio towers and posters, feel like they're being done to undermine something greater, so they feel meaningful as well as give you some XP. I also really like the side characters. Rabi Ray Rana, the radio announcer, is just hilarious, and the side missions these two give you are just wacky. And the trips to Shangri-La are really interesting. Okay, at this point I'm rambling and gushing. It'd probably be quicker to describe what I don't like about the game. Okay, the interface is actually fairly clunky. They try to give you quick access to everything when you bring up the weapon wheel, but there are so many categories and subcategories that all of the controls are so spread out. You have to bring up the inventory twice just to select mines. If I had a problem with the premise, it would be that RJ isn't receptive enough to the events around him. In Far Cry 3, the writers challenged the idea that suddenly having the capacity to kill hundreds of people for the sake of a good cause doesn't distort your moral center or your sanity. In Far Cry 4, it's never really brought up. So either RJ is just another Golden Path militia member who's just really good at his job, or he's killing a lot of people just to deliver his mother's ashes. I don't want to say the game is riddled with glitches, but there are some events in the game that just shouldn't be happening under any circumstance, including one where the game says I bumped this airplane in the middle of the air and ran out of life, but the next cutscene still played, but I still died. The game tells you not to raid the 4 major strongholds until their respective overseers are out of the picture, but they're all relatively easy to do, not much harder than the rest of the game, with the exception of the helicopters. If you don't bring either a rifle to shoot the pilot or just bring a rocket launcher, it will take so many bullets to bring these things down, and in a game where the difficulty usually feels just right, the punishment these things can take down is just arbitrary. One last thing. What is this game's fascination with should I stay or should I go? Not to get pretentious, but The Clash were far from writing their best material in 1982, and the game brandishes this song like it's the driving motif behind it all, just like Alice in Wonderland for Far Cry 3. If I were to pick a Clash song to write an entire game around, it would be Death or Glory instead. Okay, I ran out of bad things to say. Far Cry 4 is an excellent, but more importantly well-rounded, first-person shooter. It's certainly better than whatever else Ubisoft has been putting out since Rayman Legends. In fact, I'm very surprised how good this game turned out considering what a terrible year for Ubisoft it was. One day I'll review Watch Dogs just so I get to say mean things about it for 10 minutes.